The most dangerous mistake in a room full of powerful men is assuming the quiet woman knows nothing. I learned that lesson on a cold October night beneath crystal chandeliers worth more than the apartment where I grew up. The Moretti Foundation Anniversary Gala filled the Grand Regent Hotel with 500 guests dressed in wealth and confidence. Gold light spilled across marble floors. A string quartet played somewhere above the crowd. Waiters moved like shadows, carrying silver trays loaded with champagne. Everyone important in New York seemed to be there. CEOs, investors, politicians, old money families whose names appeared on buildings. And me, Delaney Brooks, former waitress, current wife of Dominic Moretti. I stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. The city glittered beneath us like a sea of diamonds. My reflection stared back from the glass. Navy evening gown. Simple earrings. No designer jewelry. No attempt to look like someone I wasn't. I could feel the eyes on me anyway. The whispers had started before I even entered the ballroom. They followed me like perfume. That's her. The waitress. Can you believe he married her? I heard she used to carry drinks at a hotel downtown. I lifted my champagne glass and pretended not to hear. Years of working customer service had taught me that skill. Sometimes silence protected your dignity better than words. Across the room stood my husband, Dominic Moretti, 6'3", black tuxedo, calm expression, the kind of man who could walk into a crowded room and somehow become its center without trying. Conversations softened when he moved. People smiled more carefully around him. Respect followed him like a shadow. Some called him a businessman. Others called him something else when they thought nobody was listening. Dominic didn't seem to notice the whispers surrounding me. Or maybe he noticed every single one. That was the frustrating thing about him. He rarely showed his hand. Mrs. Moretti. The voice came from behind me. I turned and found a silver-haired man smiling politely. His name was Preston Hale, one of the city's most recognizable investors. We had met exactly twice. Good evening, I said. His smile widened. I almost didn't recognize you without an apron. Laughter erupted from the group standing beside him. Not loud. Not cruel enough to cause a scene. Just enough. The kind designed to remind someone where they supposedly belonged. Heat rose in my chest. I kept smiling. Good evening to you too. Another man lifted his drink. Dominic always did enjoy surprising people. More laughter. Their amusement bounced between crystal glasses and polished marble. I glanced across the room. Dominic was speaking with several board members. His face remained unreadable. He gave no sign that he had heard a word. For a moment, disappointment tightened around my ribs. Then I pushed it away. I didn't need rescuing. I reminded myself of that. Again and again. The evening continued. More introductions. More smiles. More subtle insults hidden beneath compliments. Every conversation felt like a test. Every glance carried judgment. Then something unexpected happened. A man near the stage hurried toward the executive tables. His face looked pale. Concern spread through the crowd like a ripple across water. The musicians stopped playing. Conversations faded. Phones appeared. Screens lit up. I noticed Dominic look toward the stage for the first time all night. The expression in his eyes changed. Just slightly. But enough. Whatever had happened was important. Very important. And within seconds, the atmosphere inside the ballroom shifted completely. The people who had been laughing moments ago were no longer smiling. The silence lasted only a few seconds, but it changed the entire room. One by one, conversations died. Crystal glasses stopped moving. Even the servers seemed to pause between tables. I watched executives pull out their phones. Their confident smiles faded as they read the same notification. Whatever had happened was bigger than the gala. Much bigger. Preston Hale lowered his glass and stared at his screen. For the first time all evening, he was not looking at me. He was looking worried. That alone caught my attention. A large screen behind the stage flickered to life. Several board members rushed toward it. Their faces looked tense. The kind of tension people wear when millions of dollars are suddenly at risk. I shifted my attention toward Dominic. He stood perfectly still near the center of the ballroom. Most people became louder under pressure. Dominic became quieter. That was how I knew the situation was serious. A woman beside me leaned closer to her husband. Please tell me that is not our project. He did not answer. His silence told her everything. Murmurs spread across the ballroom. Fragments of conversations drifted through the air. Acquisition. Financing. Delays. Investors. Liability. I had heard enough business discussions over the years to recognize the pattern. Something had gone wrong. Something expensive. The chairman of the foundation stepped onto the stage. He adjusted his tie twice before speaking. That nervous gesture alone made several people exchange glances. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience. His voice sounded calm. His eyes did not. We are currently reviewing new information regarding the Harbor Point Development Partnership. A collective breath moved through the room. Harbor Point. Even I knew that name. It was one of the largest projects on the East Coast. Billions of dollars. Thousands of jobs. Years of planning. The chairman continued. Several concerns have emerged regarding projected returns and contractual obligations. The room erupted into conversation. Not panic. Not yet. But close. I saw Preston Hale immediately walk toward a group of investors. Another executive hurried across the ballroom while speaking into a phone. The atmosphere felt completely different now. An hour ago, people had been discussing vacations and wine collections. Now they were discussing survival. Dominic finally started moving. People stepped aside automatically as he crossed the room. He did not rush. He never rushed. Yet somehow everyone watched him. His presence pulled attention the way gravity pulls objects. I expected him to join the executives. Instead, he stopped beside me. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. I almost laughed. The entire ballroom was unraveling, and that was his first question. "I am fine," I said. "You do not look surprised." One corner of his mouth moved slightly. Not quite a smile. "I received the report 20 minutes ago. And people are about to reveal exactly who they are." Before I could ask what he meant, a man approached us. He looked to be in his 60s. Expensive watch. Expensive suit. Expensive confidence. The confidence looked weaker than before. "Dominic," he said, "we may need your input." Dominic nodded. The man's gaze shifted toward me. Recognition flashed in his eyes. Then came amusement. "Will your wife be joining us too?" Several people nearby chuckled. Not as openly as before. The room had bigger problems now. But the judgment remained. Dominic looked at him for a long moment. "If she wants to," he said. The answer surprised everyone, including me. The man forced a smile. "Of course." A few minutes later, I found myself walking toward a private executive section near the stage. Men worth hundreds of millions gathered around polished tables. Some looked irritated. Others looked frightened. One thing united them all. Not a single person believed I belonged there. As I took my seat, I caught fragments of their expressions. Doubt. Dismissal. Condescension. The same look I had seen my entire life. They still saw the waitress. They still saw the outsider. What none of them knew was that I recognized the name Harbor Point immediately. And as the first financial reports appeared on the screen, a terrible feeling settled in my stomach. Because within 30 seconds, I spotted something that nobody else seemed to notice. I stared at the financial report while conversations collided around me like waves during a storm. Numbers filled the giant screen. Charts. Forecasts. Risk assessments. Most people saw complexity. I saw something else. I saw a pattern that did not belong. The chairman adjusted his glasses and pointed toward a projection chart. The revenue shortfall appears connected to supply delays. Several executives nodded immediately. They looked relieved to have an explanation, even if it was the wrong one. A gray-haired investor stood first. "We need additional financing." Another executive disagreed. "Financing will only increase exposure." A third suggested restructuring the entire partnership. Within minutes, the table became a battlefield of opinions. Everyone had an answer. Nobody had certainty. I remained silent. My eyes stayed on the screen. One column bothered me, not because it was large, because it was small. Too small. Hidden near the bottom of the report. Easy to ignore. Easy to miss. I glanced toward Dominic. He sat at the end of the table, listening. Not speaking. Watching. The same way he watched chess matches. Patient. Calculating. Never revealing what he already knew. Across from me sat Preston Hale. He noticed where I was looking and smiled. Finding the discussion entertaining? Several people chuckled. I met his gaze. "I am trying to understand the numbers." "How admirable." More laughter followed. Softer this time. Still dismissive. Still familiar. I looked back at the screen. Years ago, those reactions would have embarrassed me. Not anymore. Experience teaches strange lessons. One of them is this. People who underestimate you often provide your greatest advantage. The chairman continued reviewing projections. Every few minutes, someone interrupted with another theory, another solution, another confident declaration. Yet the anxiety in the room kept growing. The explanations sounded polished. The numbers did not. I leaned forward slightly. The column remained there. Quiet. Forgotten. Wrong. Finally, I reached for a printed report lying beside my chair. Several pages had already been marked by analysts. I turned 3 pages. Then 4. Then 5. My stomach tightened. There it was again. The same inconsistency. Repeated. Hidden beneath layers of assumptions. A younger executive noticed me reading. Looking for the dessert menu? The joke earned scattered laughter. Someone nearly spilled his drink from amusement. I ignored them. My pulse had begun to accelerate. Not from embarrassment. From recognition. I had seen mistakes like this before. Small errors that grew into disasters because nobody questioned the original assumption. The chairman pointed toward another slide. According to our consultants, these figures are accurate. Accurate. The word echoed in my head. I looked closer. Then closer still. And suddenly I knew. The realization arrived so fast, it almost felt physical. One assumption. One number. One calculation. Everything depended on it. And it was wrong. Completely wrong. I sat back in my chair. For a moment I considered saying nothing. That would be easier. Safer. The room clearly did not want my opinion. Several people still viewed me as an uninvited guest. A former waitress occupying the wrong chair. Then I remembered something my mother used to say. If everyone is afraid to speak, the truth becomes lonely. Before I could stop myself, my hand lifted slightly above the table. The movement was small, barely noticeable, yet somehow the entire room saw it. Conversation slowed. Eyes turned toward me. Preston blinked. You have something to add? The amusement in his voice returned immediately. I felt heat rise beneath dozens of stares. Every instinct suggested remaining silent. Every memory of being dismissed urged caution. Across the table, Dominic remained perfectly still. He did not rescue me. He did not interrupt. He simply watched, waiting. The room became quiet enough to hear the distant music still playing in the ballroom beyond the doors. I swallowed carefully. I think the problem is not the supply delays. Several executives exchanged looks. One man sighed loudly. Another checked his watch. Preston smiled again. And what exactly do you think the problem is? I lowered my eyes to the report, then back to the screen, then toward the number nobody else seemed to notice. I think, I said slowly, every projection in this report is built on a calculation that should never have passed review. The silence that followed felt heavier than anything I had experienced all night. And for the first time since the emergency began, Dominic Moretti smiled. The smile on Dominic's face lasted less than a second. Most people probably missed it. I did not. That tiny expression told me 2 things. First, he understood exactly what I was seeing. Second, he wanted to know whether I could prove it. Preston Hale leaned back in his chair and folded his arms. That is a serious statement. His tone carried the same polite disbelief I had heard all evening. Around the table, several executives exchanged amused looks. One man adjusted his cufflinks and sighed dramatically. Another reached for his drink as if preparing for entertainment. The chairman cleared his throat. Mrs. Moretti, perhaps you could explain. Every eye settled on me. The giant screen continued glowing behind them. Numbers, charts, assumptions, all presented with the confidence of professional analysis. Yet confidence and accuracy were not the same thing. I placed my report on the table and turned several pages. The paper felt strangely heavy in my hands. Your projections assume a 6.3% annual growth rate. A few heads nodded immediately. Correct, someone said. That figure comes directly from the consulting report. Exactly, I replied. That is the problem. A ripple of irritation moved through the room. One executive laughed quietly. The growth rate was reviewed by 3 independent firms. Then 3 independent firms made the same mistake. The laughter disappeared, not because they agreed, because nobody expected me to answer so directly. Preston leaned forward. And what mistake would that be? I pointed toward a chart displayed on the screen. The projected growth is based on residential demand from 18 months ago. The chairman frowned. That data was considered stable. It was stable 18 months ago. I looked around the table. It is not stable today. Silence followed. A younger analyst near the back opened his laptop. His fingers began moving quickly across the keyboard. I continued. The market shifted 9 months ago. Interest rates changed. Migration patterns changed. Consumer behavior changed. Several faces tightened. They knew those facts. Everyone did. Yet nobody had questioned whether the model had been updated properly. You cannot build future projections using assumptions that belong to a different market. The analyst stopped typing. His eyes widened slightly. Preston noticed. What is it? The young man hesitated. The adjustment factor was never updated. No one spoke. The room seemed to freeze. The analyst checked again. Then a third time. She is right. The words landed harder than I expected. Chairs creaked. Several executives immediately reached for their reports. Others stared at the screen. The chairman removed his glasses and rubbed his forehead. How much does that change the forecast? The analyst swallowed. Approximately 22%. A sharp breath escaped someone near the end of the table. Another executive muttered something under his breath. 22% was not a rounding error. It was the difference between confidence and crisis. The difference between profit and disaster. Preston's expression changed for the first time all evening. The amusement vanished. That cannot be the only issue. It is not, I said. Every head turned back toward me. Dominic remained silent. Watching. Waiting. The same way he had all night. I looked down at the report again. The feeling in my stomach had not disappeared. Because the growth rate was only the first problem. The updated projection explains the shortfall. I paused. But it does not explain the missing reserves. Several people looked confused. One executive straightened immediately. What reserves? I tapped another page. These numbers do not match. The chairman reached for his own copy. Show me. I slid the report across the table. Page 42 and page 68. He compared them. His brow furrowed. Then furrowed deeper. That is impossible. A murmur spread through the room. More reports opened. More pages turned. More calculations began. The atmosphere shifted again. This time it felt colder. Heavier. Less like a business meeting and more like the moment before a storm reaches shore. Preston looked from the report to me. How did you find this? I almost smiled. Because I was reading it while everyone else was talking. No one laughed this time. Not a single person. Across the table, a senior partner suddenly looked very uncomfortable. It was subtle. Just a tightening of the jaw. A glance away from the screen. A hand gripping the armrest slightly too hard. Most people missed it. I did not. And for the first time all evening, a new thought entered my mind. Maybe this was not just a mistake. Maybe someone wanted these numbers hidden. The realization settled over the table slowly. Not like a lightning strike. More like fog creeping across a harbor. At first, only a few people sensed it. Then everyone did. The chairman remained focused on the report in front of him. His fingers tapped the paper once. Twice. 3 times. Missing reserves, he repeated quietly. Explain. I took a breath and turned several pages. The ballroom outside continued humming with distant conversations. Most guests had no idea that panic was quietly unfolding behind closed doors. The reserve account should reflect the adjusted risk model, I said. Instead, it reflects an older structure. The analyst nodded immediately. She is correct. Several executives shifted in their seats. The confidence that filled the room earlier had disappeared. Questions replaced certainty. One man loosened his tie. Another reached for water. How much are we talking about? Someone asked. The analyst typed rapidly. Numbers flashed across his screen. His expression changed. Then changed again. Approximately $84 million. Silence crashed over the room. $84 million. Nobody laughed anymore. Nobody looked at me like a former waitress. They looked at the report. They looked at each other. They looked worried. Preston Hale rubbed his chin. That amount cannot simply disappear. No, I said quietly. It cannot. The chairman sat straighter. Could this be an accounting delay? The analyst checked again. No reporting error? No timing issue? No. Every answer increased the tension. Every answer narrowed the possibilities. I noticed the senior partner again. The same man whose discomfort had caught my attention earlier. His name was Victor Langford. Mid-60s. Impeccable suit. Impeccable reputation. He had barely spoken since the discussion began. Yet his eyes kept drifting toward the reserve figures. Perhaps we are overreacting, Victor said finally. His voice sounded calm. Too calm. Complex projects often produce discrepancies. Several people seemed eager to accept that explanation. It sounded comfortable. Safe. Familiar. But comfort does not make something true. I looked back at the documents. Then at Victor. Then at the timeline displayed on the screen. Something clicked into place. A small detail. Easy to overlook. Important enough to matter. When was the reserve structure changed? I asked. The analyst searched through the files. 11 months ago. Who approved it? More typing. More silence. Then the analyst stopped. The authorization came from the Executive Oversight Committee. The chairman frowned. Which members? The analyst read several names aloud. Victor's name was among them. The room became very still. Nobody accused anyone. Not yet. But attention shifted. Victor noticed. That proves nothing, he said. Of course not, I replied. I am not saying it does. His jaw tightened slightly. Then what are you saying? I held up another page. I am saying the reserve adjustment happened 11 months ago. I turned another page. And the growth model stopped updating 9 months ago. More pages. More figures. 2 unrelated changes. Both benefiting the same projections. The analyst looked up sharply. The chairman leaned forward. Preston stopped taking notes. I continued carefully. One mistake is possible. My finger touched the second document. 2 mistakes connected to the same outcome deserve attention. Nobody interrupted. Not even Victor. Across the table, Dominic remained silent. Yet I could feel his attention. The same steady presence that never pushed. Never interfered. Simply waited for the truth to reveal itself. The analyst suddenly spoke. There is something else. Every head turned toward him. He swallowed hard. The audit trail shows several file revisions. That is normal, Victor replied immediately. Not these revisions, the analyst said. His voice sounded different now. Less confident. More concerned. Several supporting documents were removed before the final review. A chill moved through the room. The chairman slowly removed his glasses. Removed by whom? The analyst stared at the screen. His face lost color. For several seconds, he said nothing. Then he looked directly across the table, toward Victor Langford. And for the first time all evening, I realized the crisis threatening Harbor Point might not be a failed business decision at all. It might be something far more deliberate. The analyst's words hung in the air like smoke that refused to clear. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Even the distant sounds from the ballroom seemed to disappear. Victor Langford stared at the laptop screen. His expression remained composed, but something behind his eyes had changed. The chairman folded his hands carefully. Explain what you found. The analyst swallowed. The audit trail shows multiple document revisions. His fingers moved across the keyboard. Several supporting files were removed before final approval. Preston Hale leaned forward. Removed by whom? The analyst hesitated. The authorization credentials trace back to an executive account. Nobody blinked. Nobody looked away. Which account? The chairman asked. The analyst looked down again. The silence stretched. Then he spoke. Victor Langford's account. A shockwave moved through the room. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just a collective shift in posture. The kind that happens when certainty suddenly becomes fragile. Victor exhaled slowly. That proves nothing. His voice remained steady. Executives delegate access constantly. Several people nodded. The explanation sounded reasonable. On the surface, the chairman rubbed his temple. Is that possible? Of course it is, Victor replied immediately. Half the staff in this organization has touched those files at some point. I watched him carefully. His words were measured. His tone controlled. Yet something felt off. Not because of what he said. Because of what he avoided saying. He never asked which files were removed. He never asked why they mattered. He only challenged the source. Dominic remained silent beside me. His gaze never left Victor. The room divided itself without anyone noticing. One group wanted an innocent explanation. The other feared there might not be one. The analyst continued reviewing records. More windows opened on the screen. More timestamps appeared. More names. There is another issue. The chairman looked up. Go on. The deleted files were not random. A knot tightened in my stomach. What do you mean? Preston asked. The analyst enlarged a document list. Every removed file related to reserve forecasts. The room became still again. The same category. The same numbers. The same missing $84 million. Coincidence suddenly felt less likely. Victor leaned back in his chair. You are creating a narrative from incomplete information. His voice sounded calm, almost patient. People delete outdated files all the time. Not these files, I said quietly. Several heads turned toward me. Victor's eyes met mine. And how would you know? The question carried a challenge beneath its politeness. I picked up the report again. Because the reserve model references documents that no longer exist. I turned several pages. Someone removed the evidence supporting the calculation. The analyst checked immediately. His fingers moved across the keyboard. 10 seconds later, he stopped. She is right. The tension thickened. The chairman closed his eyes briefly. Not in frustration. In realization. Each new answer created 2 new questions. Preston stared at me differently now. The amusement was gone completely, replaced by something closer to respect. How did you catch all of this? He asked. I almost laughed. The answer felt embarrassingly simple. I read every page. A few people looked away. Others suddenly became interested in their reports. Because the truth was uncomfortable. The mistakes had not been hidden particularly well. They had simply been ignored, assumed away, buried beneath titles and credentials. The analyst suddenly froze. His eyes widened. There is a transfer log. Every person at the table focused on him. Transfer log, the chairman repeated. The analyst nodded slowly. Several reserve adjustments were reviewed externally. Victor's expression tightened for the briefest moment. Externally by whom? Preston asked. The analyst opened another file. Then another. The glow from the screen reflected in his glasses. I do not recognize the company name. He read it aloud. The room went silent. I recognized it immediately. Not because it was famous. Because I had seen it before. Earlier that evening. Buried inside another document nobody else had bothered to read. And the moment I heard that name, I realized the missing money was only the beginning of the story. The company name echoed in my mind long before anyone else reacted. I had seen it buried in a supplemental appendix attached to the Harbor Point projections. At the time, it looked insignificant. Now it felt like the missing piece of a puzzle. The analyst read the name again. North Star Strategic Holdings. Several executives exchanged confused looks. Nobody seemed familiar with it. Nobody except me. Victor Langford shifted slightly in his chair. The movement was small, almost invisible. Yet after everything that had happened, I noticed every detail. The chairman frowned. What exactly is North Star Strategic Holdings? The analyst typed quickly. According to public records, it is a consulting firm. Preston Hale leaned forward. A consulting firm connected to reserve adjustments? The analyst nodded. Apparently. Something felt wrong. Very wrong. Harbor Point already employed multiple consulting groups. Industry leaders. National firms. Teams large enough to fill entire office floors. Why bring in a company nobody recognized? I reached for another report. The pages rustled softly beneath my fingers. My pulse quickened. Not from fear. From certainty. I had seen that company before tonight. I just needed to remember where. The analyst opened another file. The company was added 11 months ago. 11 months. The same timeline again. The reserve changes. The deleted files. The forecasting errors. Everything pointed back to the same period. Coincidence was becoming increasingly difficult to believe. Victor folded his hands together. A consulting contract does not imply wrongdoing. Nobody disagreed. Yet nobody sounded convinced either. The room had crossed an invisible line. Earlier, people wanted reassurance. Now they wanted answers. Those were very different things. The chairman looked toward the analyst. Can you identify who approved the contract? More typing followed. More silence. Then the analyst stopped. The recommendation came through executive review. Preston sighed. Everything seems to lead back to executive review. Nobody laughed. Not even a little. I turned another page. Then another. Suddenly I found it. My eyes stopped moving. There it was. A reference number. A vendor code. Tiny. Easy to miss. Connected to North Star Strategic Holdings. My stomach tightened. I know where I saw it. Every head turned toward me. The attention no longer felt dismissive. It felt expectant. The difference was startling. Preston spoke first. You recognize the company? Not the company, I said. The vendor code. The analyst looked interested immediately. Where? I slid the report across the table. Appendix 14. Several pages flipped simultaneously. The analyst found it first. His eyes widened. She is right. The chairman leaned over his shoulder. What am I looking at? The analyst pointed toward the screen. North Star received performance incentive payments. Silence followed. The chairman blinked. Performance incentives for what? The analyst kept reading. His expression grew darker. For meeting projected benchmarks. I felt the room change. Again, every new answer made the situation worse. Because those benchmarks were tied directly to the numbers that had been manipulated. The same numbers generating the current crisis. Preston sat back slowly. You were telling me they were financially rewarded based on projections they helped create. That appears to be correct, the analyst said. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The logic was impossible to ignore. If projections improved, payments increased. If risks appeared smaller, rewards became larger. The structure practically invited problems. Victor cleared his throat. You are making assumptions. His voice remained calm, yet it no longer carried the same confidence. No, I said quietly. The documents are making the assumptions. His eyes locked onto mine. The room watched us. Not as enemies. Not as opponents. More like two people standing on opposite sides of a truth neither could fully see yet. Dominic remained silent. But for the first time all evening, I noticed something unusual. Several executives had begun watching him, waiting for him to intervene, waiting for him to decide something. He never did. He simply listened. The analyst suddenly froze again. There is another record. Nobody breathed. What kind of record? The chairman asked. The analyst stared at the screen. An internal warning memo. My pulse jumped. Warning memo. Preston repeated. The analyst nodded slowly. Someone raised concerns 8 months ago. The room erupted with questions. Who raised them? What concerns? Why was it ignored? The analyst opened the file. His eyes scanned the page. Then he stopped. Completely stopped. A strange expression crossed his face. Shock. Genuine shock. What is it? The chairman demanded. The analyst looked up from the screen. His voice barely rose above a whisper. The person who filed the warning predicted every single problem we are discussing tonight. The room seemed to shrink around that single sentence. Nobody cared about the gala anymore. Nobody cared about the speeches, the champagne, or the celebration happening beyond those doors. Every person at the table stared at the analyst. Who wrote the memo? The chairman asked. The analyst scrolled slowly through the file. His eyes moved across the screen. Then he stopped. The author requested anonymity. Frustration appeared immediately. Several executives began speaking at once. Questions collided across the table. The chairman raised his hand for silence. Read the memo. The analyst nodded. His voice echoed through the room. Current reserve projections contain unsupported assumptions. Forecast models rely on outdated market conditions. Independent review process lacks transparency. External consultants possess financial incentives tied directly to reported outcomes. Every sentence landed harder than the one before it. Because every sentence described exactly what we had uncovered tonight. 8 months earlier, someone had seen the entire problem. 8 months earlier, someone had tried to stop it. And nobody listened. Preston rubbed his forehead. How was this ignored? Nobody answered. The question hung in the air. Victor Langford looked toward the chairman. Anonymous complaints appear constantly in organizations this size. The explanation sounded reasonable, yet it felt weaker now. Every answer he offered seemed designed to reduce urgency, to soften concern, to slow momentum. I looked toward the screen again. The memo remained open. Something bothered me. Not the warning itself. The language. The wording felt familiar. Precise. Structured. Analytical. My eyes moved across each sentence. Then suddenly a memory surfaced. A conference room. 3 years earlier. A consulting project in Boston. A senior analyst explaining risk exposure. The phrasing had sounded almost identical. My pulse quickened. Not because I remembered the analyst. Because I remembered myself. Before my mother became sick. Before hospital visits consumed my life. Before I left the career everyone assumed I never had. I used to write reports exactly like this. I used to spend nights reviewing financial models and risk assessments. I used to live inside spreadsheets and projections. Nobody at this table knew that. Most people only knew the version of me carrying trays through crowded dining rooms. They never asked what came before. There is another page, the analyst said suddenly. The room focused again. He opened the next section. The author attached supporting calculations. The chairman leaned forward. Can we verify them? The analyst started reviewing the formulas. Minutes passed. The only sounds came from typing and the distant music outside. Then he stopped. Completely stopped. The calculations are accurate. Silence followed. Accurate. Preston repeated. Every projection. The analyst nodded. The author predicted the reserve shortfall within less than 1%. Nobody spoke. 8 months ago, someone had forecast the exact crisis now threatening Harbor Point. Not approximately. Not generally. Precisely. The chairman looked exhausted. Then why was this buried? Nobody answered immediately. Finally, Victor spoke. Because predictions are not facts. Several people glanced toward him. The reaction was different now. Earlier, his words carried authority. Now they invited scrutiny. The shift was impossible to miss. Dominic remained perfectly calm. Yet I noticed several executives watching him again. Waiting. Measuring his reaction. He gave them nothing. The analyst suddenly clicked another attachment. There is a final note. The room fell silent once more. He read carefully. If these concerns remain unresolved, future reviews should examine relationships between external consultants and executive oversight personnel. Every person at the table understood the implication. Nobody said it aloud. They did not need to. The memo had pointed toward a possible conflict of interest 8 months ago. The same conflict we were now uncovering piece by piece. Preston looked toward Victor. Victor looked toward the screen. The chairman looked tired. And I felt something strange settle in my chest. Confidence. Not because I had all the answers. Because the pattern was finally becoming visible. Then the analyst opened one final attachment. His eyebrows lifted immediately. What now? The chairman asked. The analyst stared at the screen. The anonymous author attached a personal note. Nobody moved. Read it, Preston said quietly. The analyst swallowed. Then he read the final sentence aloud. If this report disappears, you should ask who benefits from its disappearance. The room froze. Because for the first time all evening, everyone was no longer asking what happened. They were starting to ask who wanted it to happen. Nobody spoke after the analyst finished reading the note. The silence felt different now. Earlier, people were worried about numbers. Now they were worried about motives. The chairman slowly leaned back in his chair. His expression had aged 10 years since the meeting began. Continue, he said quietly. The analyst nodded and returned to the files. Every person at the table watched his screen as though it contained the future. In a way, it did. Preston Hale folded his hands together. If someone predicted all of this 8 months ago, why was the warning never escalated? Nobody answered immediately. The question was too dangerous. Too direct. Because if the warning had been ignored intentionally, then the crisis was not an accident. It was a choice. My eyes drifted toward Victor Langford. He appeared calm, professional, composed. Yet something about his stillness felt unnatural. Most people become restless under pressure. Victor had become motionless. The analyst suddenly opened another file. I found the distribution list. Several heads lifted. Distribution list? The chairman repeated. The people who received the anonymous report. My pulse quickened. This mattered. A warning can be ignored. A warning received by the right people becomes much harder to explain away. The analyst scanned the document, then began reading names aloud. The chairman, several board members, 2 outside consultants, a legal review team. Every name increased the tension. Every name reduced the number of possible explanations. Because the memo had not disappeared into some forgotten inbox. It had reached important people, powerful people, people whose job was to notice risks. Keep going, Preston said. The analyst continued, then stopped abruptly. His eyes narrowed. There is one more recipient. The room became still. Who? Asked the chairman. The analyst looked directly at the screen. Victor Langford. No one reacted immediately. The silence itself became the reaction. Victor's expression did not change. I receive hundreds of reports every year. His voice remained calm. Receiving a document does not mean I agreed with its conclusions. The statement sounded reasonable, yet it solved nothing. The chairman rubbed his forehead. Did you review the report? Victor paused, just for a second. Yet everyone noticed. I do not recall. That answer landed badly. Very badly. People can forget details. They rarely forget warnings predicting $84 million in missing reserves. Preston exchanged a glance with another executive. For the first time all evening, doubt had become visible. The analyst continued searching. More documents appeared. More timestamps. More correspondence. Then his eyes widened again. There were follow-up messages. The chairman straightened immediately. From the anonymous author? Yes. My heartbeat accelerated. Every layer revealed another layer beneath it. The analyst opened the first message. The room listened. The author had requested a formal review, requested independent verification, requested protection for supporting documents. Every request had been denied. The second message sounded more urgent. The third sounded almost desperate. Someone had spent months trying to prevent this crisis. Someone had seen exactly where the road ended. Nobody listened. Or perhaps someone listened and decided not to act. The difference mattered. A lot. Dominic remained silent beside me. Yet I noticed something unusual. His eyes were no longer focused on the screen. They were focused on people. Watching reactions. Measuring expressions. Tracking details others missed. That was one reason he had built an empire. While everyone else watched events, he watched people. The analyst clicked another attachment. This appears to be the final communication. Nobody moved. Read it, the chairman said. The analyst swallowed and began. The message was brief, direct, unmistakably frustrated. It stated that if internal reviews failed, external investigators might eventually uncover the same issues. It warned that deleted records would create even greater suspicion. Then came the final sentence. The analyst read it slowly. The problem is no longer the numbers. The problem is the person protecting them. The room froze. Completely froze. Because for the first time all evening, the evidence was no longer pointing toward a mistake. It was pointing toward a specific individual. And as every eye gradually turned toward Victor Langford, I realized the real confrontation had not even begun yet. Every eye in the room settled on Victor Langford. Nobody accused him directly. Nobody needed to. The documents had already done most of the talking. Victor remained composed. His hands rested calmly on the table. His expression revealed nothing. Yet the atmosphere around him had changed completely. An hour ago, people sought his approval. Now they questioned his presence. The chairman broke the silence first. Victor, do you want to respond? Victor adjusted his cufflinks carefully. Of course. His voice remained steady. Because what is happening here is dangerous. Several people exchanged glances. Dangerous? Preston Hale asked. Victor nodded. A room full of executives is building conclusions from incomplete information. The statement sounded reasonable, rational, professional, exactly the kind of response many people wanted to hear. The anonymous memo proves concerns existed, Victor continued. It does not prove misconduct. Nobody interrupted. He stood slowly from his chair. The Harbor Point project involves hundreds of contracts and thousands of transactions. He gestured toward the reports. Finding inconsistencies is not unusual. Some faces softened. Others remained skeptical. Victor understood something important. Doubt spreads faster than certainty. If he could create enough doubt, the momentum might disappear. I watched him carefully. Every word sounded polished. Every sentence sounded prepared. Too prepared. The chairman folded his arms. Then explained the deleted files. Victor nodded as though expecting the question. Administrative cleanup. The analyst immediately shook his head. The files contained supporting calculations. Victor looked toward him. Outdated calculations. The reserve models still referenced them, the analyst replied. Victor paused briefly. A small pause. Yet after everything tonight, even small pauses mattered. Preston leaned forward. What about the external consultant? Victor smiled politely. North Star Strategic Holdings was recommended by multiple parties. Who? Someone asked. Victor did not answer immediately. Another pause. Another tiny crack. I looked down at the documents scattered across the table. The pattern had bothered me all evening. Every answer led somewhere. Every trail connected. Yet one question remained unresolved. Who benefited? The anonymous memo had repeated that question several times. Who benefited? I began flipping through pages again. Numbers. Contracts. Forecast revisions. Payment schedules. Then something caught my attention. A familiar sequence of dates. My pulse quickened. The same months appeared repeatedly. Reserve changes. Consultant payments. Executive approvals. Everything clustered around one period. I traced the timeline with my finger. Then I saw it. A transaction. Small compared to the larger figures. Easy to overlook. Yet somehow it felt important. Wait, I said quietly. The room turned toward me. Victor stopped speaking. I studied the page again. What is it? Preston asked. I looked toward the analyst. Can you pull the consultant payment records? He nodded and began searching. Seconds later, the information appeared on screen. The room leaned forward collectively. The payment schedule filled the display. Dates, amounts, authorizations. I compared them against the report in front of me, then against another report, then another. My heartbeat accelerated. There, I said. The analyst followed my finger. His eyes widened. What? The chairman asked. The analyst swallowed. The performance bonuses increased immediately after each forecast adjustment. Silence. Complete silence. The implication was obvious. Every time the projections improved, the consultant earned more money. Every time the risks appeared smaller, the rewards became larger. Preston stared at the screen. That is an extraordinary incentive structure. Yes, I said softly. It is. Victor remained standing. His expression had become harder to read. That proves nothing. Yet his voice sounded different now. Less certain. Less controlled. The analyst continued reviewing records. Then suddenly he froze. There is another authorization. Nobody moved. Another payment? The chairman asked. No. The analyst stared at the screen. Another signature. My stomach tightened. The room seemed to hold its breath. Whose signature? Preston asked. The analyst looked up slowly. Shock filled his face. Genuine shock. It does not belong to Victor Langford. Confusion spread instantly. The chairman frowned. Then whose is it? The analyst turned the screen toward the table. The person approving the final revisions was someone else entirely. Every person leaned forward. Every eye focused on the name appearing across the authorization record. And in that moment, I realized the man everyone suspected might not be the mastermind at all. He might only be protecting someone far more important. Nobody spoke for several seconds. The revelation shattered every assumption in the room. Victor Langford remained standing beside his chair. Yet suddenly he was no longer the center of attention. Every eye shifted toward the screen, toward the unfamiliar name attached to the final authorization. The chairman stared at it, then stared again. That cannot be correct. The analyst checked the record twice. Then a third time. The authorization chain is valid. Preston Hale leaned forward. Who is this person? The analyst opened another file. A member of the Harbor Point Advisory Committee. Confusion spread immediately. Most executives recognized the major board members. Very few recognized advisory personnel. They operated in the background, away from attention, away from scrutiny, exactly where important decisions could hide. I watched Victor carefully. For the first time all evening, relief flickered across his face. Small, brief, almost invisible, yet it was there. The expression told me something important. Victor had been protecting someone, and now that person finally had a name. The chairman rubbed his forehead. Pull up everything connected to this authorization. The analyst obeyed immediately. Documents appeared across the screen. Contracts, reviews, approval chains, internal correspondence. The deeper he searched, the stranger the pattern became. The mysterious advisor appeared repeatedly. Not everywhere, just often enough to matter. Like fingerprints left behind by someone who believed nobody was looking. How did we miss this? Preston asked quietly. Nobody answered. Because everyone knew the truth. They missed it because they never expected to look. The analyst opened another record. There is a relationship disclosure form. My pulse quickened. Relationships mattered. Incentives mattered. Motives mattered. The chairman leaned closer. Read it. The analyst scanned the document. His eyebrows rose. The advisor previously worked with North Star Strategic Holdings. The room froze again. Every trail led back to the same place. Every answer connected to the same network. The consultant. The forecasts. The deleted files. The missing reserves. Now the advisor. Victor sat down slowly. His confidence seemed diminished. Not destroyed. Just reduced. Like a man realizing the storm had changed direction. This still proves nothing illegal, he said. His voice sounded tired now. Nobody argued. Nobody agreed either. The discussion had moved beyond simple accusations. People wanted understanding. They wanted the complete picture. I looked at the timeline again. 11 months. 9 months. 8 months. The sequence repeated throughout every document. Then another realization struck me. A simple question. One nobody had asked yet. Why would someone do all of this? The room turned toward me. Meaning? Preston asked. I pointed toward the screen. Everyone keeps focusing on the missing reserves. My finger moved toward another chart. But Harbor Point is much larger than $84 million. The analyst looked interested immediately. Go on. I took a breath. If the projections stayed inflated, investment would continue flowing into the project. The chairman nodded slowly. Of course. And if investment continued flowing, I said, property acquisitions would continue too. Silence settled across the room. The analyst began typing again. Fast. Much faster than before. Property acquisitions, he repeated. His eyes scanned another database. Then suddenly he stopped. Completely stopped. What is it? Preston asked. The analyst swallowed hard. There were several land purchases connected to Harbor Point. Nobody reacted yet. Not until he continued. They were completed through shell companies. The room erupted with questions. The chairman raised his hand again. Can you trace ownership? The analyst worked rapidly. Files opened and closed across the screen. Seconds felt like minutes. Finally, he leaned back. Shock covered his face. Genuine shock. The shell companies eventually connect to North Star Strategic Holdings. Nobody breathed. Nobody moved. The puzzle pieces finally started locking together. Inflated projections encouraged investment. Investment increased land values. Rising land values benefited connected companies. Suddenly, the missing reserves looked smaller than the real prize. Much smaller. Dominic remained silent throughout the entire discussion. Then something unexpected happened. He stood. The movement was simple. Yet every conversation stopped instantly. Every head turned toward him. He looked around the table slowly, calmly, deliberately. Then his gaze settled on me. I have one question, he said. His voice was quiet. Yet everyone heard it. Who wrote the anonymous memo? And in that moment, I realized I already knew the answer. The question settled over the room with incredible weight. For the first time all evening, nobody looked at the screen. Nobody looked at the reports. They looked at me. Dominic stood beside the table, calm as ever. Yet his eyes told me something different. He already knew, or at least suspected. The chairman cleared his throat. Delaney? I lowered my gaze to the memo still displayed on the screen. The words felt familiar. Not because I remembered reading them. Because I remembered writing them. 8 months earlier, I had reviewed portions of the Harbor Point projections as a favor for an old colleague. Nothing official. Nothing public. Just a second opinion requested over coffee and concern. I had expected minor issues. Instead, I found patterns that refused to make sense. The same patterns sitting in front of us tonight. Preston stared at me. You know who wrote it. It was not a question. I nodded slowly. The room remained silent. I do. The chairman leaned forward. Who? I took a careful breath. The memory returned with startling clarity. Long nights. Medical bills. Hospital waiting rooms. Caring for my mother while trying to hold together a career that no longer fit my life. Most people only knew me as a waitress because that was the version of me they met. They never knew what came before. They never asked. The author requested anonymity because she knew nobody would listen otherwise. Confusion spread across several faces. Then realization followed. Preston's eyes widened first. The analyst looked stunned. The chairman froze completely. She, he repeated. I nodded again. The anonymous author was me. No one spoke. The silence felt almost unreal. Victor Langford stared at me as though seeing me for the first time. The analyst looked back and forth between me and the screen. You wrote the report? I nodded. Every page. The chairman removed his glasses. Why did nobody know? A sad smile touched my face. Because nobody asked. The answer landed harder than I expected. People looked away. Not from embarrassment alone. From recognition. Earlier that evening they had laughed about my past. Mocked my history. Assumed they understood my entire life because they once saw me carrying plates through a dining room. Yet none of them knew I had spent years analyzing risk models for major development projects. None of them knew I left that career to care for my mother during her illness. None of them knew I walked away from promotions, titles, and opportunities because family mattered more. Dominic never looked surprised. Not even slightly. Preston noticed. You already knew. Dominic's expression softened. Of course I knew. The room turned toward him. He glanced at me before continuing. The first time I met Delaney, she corrected an analyst during a private meeting. A faint smile appeared. The analyst spent 20 minutes arguing before realizing she was right. A few people almost laughed. Almost. Dominic continued. That was years ago. He looked around the room slowly. Most people see what is directly in front of them. His gaze settled on several executives. Very few take time to see what is underneath. Nobody interrupted. Nobody challenged him. Because everyone understood exactly what he meant. The chairman looked toward me again. Then why remain silent all night? I thought about the question carefully. Because the evidence mattered more than my opinion. The analyst nodded immediately. He understood. Facts convince people. Titles only delay the conversation. Preston leaned back slowly. You predicted everything. Not everything, I said. Just enough. The room felt different now. The suspicion, the tension, the dismissiveness. All of it had changed. For hours people searched for the smartest person in the room. They never thought to look at the woman they underestimated first. Then the analyst opened one final document. His eyes widened immediately. There is something else. The chairman looked exhausted. What now? The analyst turned the screen toward everyone. The original recommendation rejecting Delaney's warning. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. It includes the names of everyone who voted against the review. And suddenly, several of the men who had mocked me earlier in the evening began looking very uncomfortable. The room became so quiet that I could hear the faint hum of the projector above us. Nobody rushed to speak. Nobody rushed to defend themselves. The analyst's screen had already done enough damage. The names were there. Clear. Permanent. Impossible to explain away with a clever comment or polished smile. Several of the executives who had laughed at me earlier suddenly found the table fascinating. They stared at reports, checked phones, avoided eye contact, anything except looking at the evidence. The chairman studied the list for a long moment. His face revealed disappointment more than anger. These were the votes rejecting the review? The analyst nodded. Every recorded vote. Preston Hale looked down at the screen and slowly exhaled. So the warning was not ignored. Nobody answered. He continued anyway. It was dismissed. That distinction mattered. Ignoring a problem suggested carelessness. Dismissing it suggested choice. The room understood the difference immediately. Victor Langford looked exhausted now. Not defeated. Just tired. Like a man carrying a burden longer than anyone realized. For what it is worth, he said quietly, I argued for a limited review. Several people looked surprised. The chairman raised an eyebrow. You never mentioned that. Victor offered a weak smile. Nobody asked. The irony settled heavily across the room. Earlier that evening, nobody asked who I was before becoming a waitress. Nobody asked why the warning existed. Nobody asked why the numbers felt wrong. Assumptions had filled every empty space. And assumptions nearly cost them everything. The analyst continued reviewing records. One final conclusion appeared on the screen. Harbor Point remained recoverable. The reserve issue could be corrected. The consultant agreements could be terminated. The acquisition structure could be reviewed. The crisis was serious, but it was not fatal. Relief spread slowly through the room. Not celebration. Relief. The kind people feel when they realize disaster can still be avoided. The chairman stood first. We begin a full independent review tomorrow morning. Nobody objected. All related contracts are suspended pending investigation. Again, nobody objected. And every recommendation contained in Delaney's original report will be reevaluated immediately. This time several people nodded. Some out of agreement. Others out of necessity. Preston looked toward me. The same man who had joked about aprons hours earlier now seemed unable to meet my eyes for long. I owe you an apology. The room grew still. He stood slowly. Actually, several apologies. A few uncomfortable smiles appeared. Preston shook his head. I spent the evening assuming I knew exactly who you were. His voice softened. That was my mistake. One by one, others followed. Not dramatic speeches. Not grand gestures. Just honest acknowledgments. They had judged too quickly. Dismissed too easily. Laughed too confidently. Through it all, Dominic remained silent. Watching. Listening. Waiting. Then the chairman turned toward him. You knew all along, did not you? A faint smile touched Dominic's face. I knew who my wife was. The answer lingered in the room. Simple. Powerful. Complete. Dominic stepped beside me and placed a hand gently over mine. Nothing possessive. Nothing theatrical. Just quiet certainty. The smartest person in this room was never trying to impress anyone, he said. Nobody laughed. Nobody challenged him. Because after everything that happened, the statement felt less like praise and more like fact. Beyond the conference room doors, the gala continued. Music still played. Glasses still clinked. Manhattan still glittered beyond the windows. Yet everything felt different. The people who entered this evening believing power came from titles were leaving with a different lesson. Titles create introductions. Character creates respect. As Dominic and I walked toward the ballroom, I caught my reflection in the glass again. Same dress. Same face. Same woman. Nothing about me had changed tonight. The only thing that changed was what other people finally chose to see. And sometimes that is the most powerful victory of all.